William Bill Radovich didn't have the biggest name in football, but his courage changed the game forever. Born in 1915, Radovich played college football at the University of Southern California before joining the Detroit Lions in 1938. As an offensive guard, he quickly earned a reputation for his strength and dependability, helping the Lions reach the playoffs and earning respect across the league. In 1946, Radovich asked the Lions for a raise or a trade so he could play closer to his ill father in California. When they refused, he left the NFL to join the Los Angeles Dons in the rival All-America Football Conference AAFC. That decision ended his NFL career overnight. The league blacklisted him, warning other teams not to hire him. Even those outside the NFL, he couldn't find work anywhere in professional football. Most players would have accepted defeat, but Radovich decided to fight back. He filed a federal lawsuit against the NFL, arguing that the league had violated the Sherman Antitrust Act by restricting his right to earn a living. The case climbed through the courts for nearly a decade before reaching the U.S. Supreme Court in 1957. In Radovich versus National Football League, the Supreme Court held that football is subject to antitrust laws, unlike Major League Baseball. This meant the NFL could be sued for unfair business practices. It was a groundbreaking decision that opened the door for future player lawsuits, free agency battles, and union protections that define modern sports today. Bill Radovich never returned to the NFL, but his victory changed it forever. Joe Cap never played it safe at quarterback. Known for his grit and bulldog spirit, he led with toughness instead of flair. Before his courtroom battle with the league, Cap built a remarkable career. At the University of California, he was a standout quarterback who later became a star in the Canadian Football League, leading the BC Lions to a Grey Cup victory in 1964. When he joined the Minnesota Vikings in 1967, he carried that same fiery energy to the NFL. By 1969, he had led the Vikings to an NFL championship and a trip to Super Bowl IV, cementing his reputation as one of football's toughest leaders. But his fight for fairness off the field would make even more history. After the 1970 season, Cap refused to sign the NFL's standard player contract, a deal that gave teams almost total control over players' careers. That decision made him a target. The Boston Patriots released him, and no other team would sign him. It wasn't about his skill. It was about his defiance. Cap argued that the NFL's system, especially the Roselle rule, which allowed the commissioner to demand compensation from teams that signed free agents, was unfair and illegal. He believed players deserved the right to negotiate and move freely, just like anyone in any other profession. In 1974, the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of California held that several NFL restraints, including the Roselle rule, violated federal antitrust law. In 1978, the Ninth Circuit addressed the case on appeal. Though Cap didn't receive damages, the case cracked the system and helped set the stage for modern free agency. Though Cap didn't receive damages, the verdict was a breakthrough for player rights. His case helped lay the groundwork for the end of the Roselle rule and paved the way for the modern era of NFL free agency. John Mackey changed football, not only with his hands, but with his courage. A tight end for the Baltimore Colts from 1963 to 1971, Mackey was known for his unmatched power and speed. He earned 5 Pro Bowl selections, 3 All-Pro honors, and a Super Bowl V victory. In 1992, he was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. But beyond the touchdowns and trophies, Mackey's greatest legacy came in a courtroom, not a stadium. In the early 1970s, NFL players had little control over their own careers. The league's Roselle rule allowed the commissioner to demand compensation from any team that signed a free agent, often discouraging teams from making offers at all. It meant that even after contracts expired, players were still tied to their old teams. As president of the NFL Players Association, John Mackey believed that it was unfair and illegal. So he became the lead plaintiff in Mackey versus National Football League, a landmark antitrust case filed in Minnesota federal court. The case challenged the Roselle rule under the Sherman Antitrust Act. In 1975, the U.S. District Court in Minnesota ruled that the rule violated federal antitrust laws under the rule of reason. The decision was upheld the following year by the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals. The court found that the rule unfairly restricted player movement and had no reasonable connection to maintaining competitive balance. Mackey's win didn't bring him money, but it opened the door for future free agency, a right that reshaped professional football in the 1980s and beyond. John Mackey's stand against the NFL changed how athletes are treated across all major sports. He proved that players were more than just assets. They were workers with legal rights. Today, every free agent deal owes a quiet debt to the man who stood up to the league and won. By the way, I'm gonna be posting a lot more interesting videos on the channel. I'll greatly appreciate it if you could show support by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Thank you. Freeman McNeil did more than carry the ball for the New York Jets. He helped free future players from one of the league's toughest rules. Drafted 6th overall in 1981, McNeil played 12 seasons in New York, rushing for over 8,000 yards, earning 3 Pro Bowl selections, and helping the Jets reach multiple playoff runs. But his biggest victory didn't come on the field. It came in a courtroom in Minnesota. In 1989, McNeil and a group of players, including Tim McDonald, Hardy Nickerson, and others, filed an antitrust lawsuit against the NFL. Their target was Plan B free agency, a system created by the league in 1989 that allowed teams to protect up to 37 players on their roster. The rest could technically sign elsewhere, but only if another team was willing to surrender compensation, a steep price that made movement nearly impossible. McNeil and his attorneys argued that this setup illegally restricted competition and violated U.S. antitrust law. The case, known as McNeil versus National Football League, went to trial in 1992 in the U.S. District Court for Minnesota. After a 6-week trial, the jury ruled in favor of McNeil and the players, declaring that Plan B unlawfully restrained competition and violated the Sherman Antitrust Act. This ruling effectively dismantled the system and became the foundation for true NFL free agency, which officially arrived with the 1993 collective bargaining agreement. Freeman McNeil never signed a massive free agent contract himself, but every star who has, from Deion Sanders to Patrick Mahomes, owes part of that freedom to his courage. If you're loving these untold battles behind the game, hit that like button right now. It tells us you want more stories the NFL doesn't talk about. Alan Page did more than dominate offenses. He helped change the system that governed players. For decades, NFL teams controlled nearly every move a player made, even after a contract ended. The league used something called the Roselle rule, which let the commissioner decide what compensation a team would get if a player signed elsewhere. It kept players tied down. Free agency barely existed. In 1975, a group of players decided enough was enough. Led by John Mackey, the former Baltimore Colts tight end, they filed an antitrust lawsuit against the NFL, challenging the Roselle rule. Among the named plaintiffs were several active players, including Alan Page of the Vikings, Kermit Alexander, Ken Bowman, and others. They argued that the NFL's rule illegally restricted their right to seek fair contracts and employment under U.S. antitrust laws. After a 55-day trial in federal court, the players won. The court ruled that the Roselle rule was an unreasonable restraint of trade and violated antitrust law. The Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals upheld the key parts of that decision in 1976, forcing the NFL to modify its player movement system. This wasn't just a legal victory. It was the first real crack in the wall that kept NFL players from controlling their own careers. Long before courtrooms and legal citations, Alan Page was a nightmare for quarterbacks. Drafted in 1967 out of Notre Dame, he anchored the Purple the People Eaters defensive line for the Vikings. He became the NFL's most valuable player in 1971, one of the few defensive players ever to earn that title. Over his 15-year career, Page played in 218 consecutive games, made 9 Pro Bowls, and helped lead Minnesota to 4 Super Bowl appearances. But even while dominating on the field, he was studying law at night. He earned his Juris Doctor from the University of Minnesota in 1978, just 2 years after the Mackey decision. That combination, power on the field, intellect off it, made Page stand out. He later served as a Minnesota Supreme Court Justice from 1993 to 2015, becoming one of the few athletes in American history to reach the highest levels of both sports and law. Reggie White's name is remembered for dominance on the field, but his biggest win came off it. Known as the Minister of Defense, White was one of the greatest defensive ends in NFL history, with 198 career sacks, 13 Pro Bowl selections, and a Super Bowl victory with the Green Bay Packers. Yet, beyond his Hall of Fame resume, he helped reshape how the NFL operates, giving players the freedom to choose their own teams and negotiate their own futures. In 1992, Reggie White became the lead plaintiff in a landmark class action lawsuit. Alongside other players, he accused the league of violating U.S. antitrust laws by using restrictive rules that blocked free agency. Back then, even when a player's contract expired, teams still controlled their rights through mechanisms like Plan B, which let clubs protect most of their rosters from outside offers. White and the players argued that this system unfairly limited their earning power and movement. After months of legal pressure, negotiations, and a looming trial, the NFL reached a historic settlement in 1993. The result changed the business of football forever. Players gained true free agency for the first time, while the league introduced a salary cap to keep financial balance. This agreement became the foundation of the modern NFL, affecting every contract, trade, and negotiation that followed. When Reggie White signed with the Green Bay Packers in 1993 as a free agent, it symbolized a new era. His move wasn't just about changing teams, it was proof that the players' fight had worked. Jim McMahon led the 1985 Chicago Bears, bold, fearless, and unforgettable. As quarterback, he helped lead one of the greatest teams in NFL history to victory in Super Bowl 20. Known for his trademark headband and defiant confidence, McMahon played the game with grit, throwing for more than 18,000 yards and earning a Pro Bowl selection. But long after the cheers faded, his body and mind began to pay the price for the hits he took on the field. By the late 2000s, McMahon's life had changed dramatically. He began suffering from severe memory loss, chronic headaches, and depression, symptoms linked to repeated head trauma. Doctors later diagnosed him with early-stage dementia. In interviews, he described moments when he couldn't remember where he lived and said that spinal fluid blockages caused unbearable pressure in his head. In 2011, McMahon joined a wave of lawsuits against the NFL, claiming the league had ignored years of evidence about the dangers of concussions. Those suits were eventually consolidated into one of the largest class actions in sports history. The players accused the league of hiding information about the long-term effects of head injuries, including chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE. By August 2013, the NFL agreed to a settlement worth $765 million to cover medical exams, compensation, and research for former players suffering from brain injuries. The deal was later expanded to remove payment caps, making it one of the most significant player health settlements ever reached. Federal Judge Anita Brody gave final approval in 2015, marking the beginning of a program that has since paid out more than $1 billion in claims. For Jim McMahon, this wasn't just a lawsuit. It was a fight for recognition. He became a voice for those whose pain had been overlooked for decades. Mark Collins. He locked down wide receivers and helped the New York Giants win championships. But off the field, he played a part in one of the most important legal battles in NFL history, a fight that gave players the freedom they enjoy today. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, NFL players had almost no real control over their careers. Even when their contracts expired, teams could still claim rights over them under a system called Plan B free agency. It allowed each team to protect 37 players, leaving the rest with little power to negotiate fair deals. It looked like freedom on paper, but in reality, it kept players tied to their teams. That system was challenged in a 1992 federal lawsuit called McNeil vs. NFL. 8 players, Freeman McNeil, Mark Collins, Lee Rowson, Nico Noga, Don Majkowski, Dave Richards, Tim McDonald, Frank Minifield, took on the league. They claimed that Plan B broke U.S. antitrust laws by unfairly restricting competition for their services. At that time, Mark Collins was already a respected defensive back. Drafted by the Giants in 1986, he became a key part of their defense and helped the team win 2 Super Bowls, 21 and 25. But like many others, he saw how the NFL's system stopped players from testing the open market. So he joined the case, standing up not just for himself, but for every player who wanted a fair chance. In September 1992, a jury in Minnesota ruled in favor of the players. The court declared that Plan B was an illegal restraint of trade, effectively dismantling the old system. This landmark decision led to the 1993 collective bargaining agreement, which introduced true free agency and the modern salary cap, 2 features that continue to shape today's NFL. Ken Bowman meant more to Green Bay than a name on the roster. He was the man snapping the ball to Bart Starr during the Ice Bowl, the 1967 NFL championship game played in -13 degrees. Bowman's key block helped Starr push across the goal line for the game-winning touchdown, sealing the Packers' 3rd straight title. But what makes Bowman's story unforgettable isn't only what he did on the field, it's what he did in the courtroom. While still playing for the Packers, Bowman earned his law degree from the University of Wisconsin in 1972. He wasn't afraid to challenge authority. During the 1974 players' strike, he served as the Packers' union representative and was even arrested on the picket line outside Lambeau Field. The next year, he became part of something that would permanently change the NFL's power structure. In Mackey versus National Football League, 1975, Bowman joined John Mackey, Alan Page, and other players to challenge the NFL's Roselle rule. That rule gave the NFL commissioner control over player movement, essentially letting teams claim compensation whenever a player switched clubs, which made free agency nearly impossible. After a 55-day trial, Judge Earl R. Larson ruled the Roselle rule violated the Sherman Act. In a separate 1975 case, Bowman vs. NFL, Chief Judge Edward Devitt granted a preliminary injunction lifting the league's post-WFL hiring ban for the remainder of that season. The ruling opened the door for modern free agency and reshaped labor rights in professional football. Bowman's name, listed alongside Mackey and others, became part of one of the most important antitrust victories in sports history. But Bowman wasn't finished. That same year, he stood at the center of another fight. Bowman vs. NFL, 1975. After the short-lived World Football League collapsed, several players, including Bowman, were banned from signing with NFL teams for the rest of the season. Bowman led the lawsuit that challenged that policy and won an injunction forcing the NFL to lift the ban. It was another victory for player freedom, one that reinforced that athletes had rights far beyond the field. After retiring, Bowman practiced law in Wisconsin and later in Arizona. He was inducted into the Green Bay Packers Hall of Fame in 1981, remembered not only as a champion center, but as a man who helped change the rules of the game, literally. Tom Brady. In 2011, football stopped. The NFL shut down its operations, players were locked out, and fans faced the real possibility of no season. But in the middle of that chaos, one of the game's biggest stars, Tom Brady, stepped off the field and into a courtroom. His name would top a lawsuit that helped end the lockout and reshape the business of football. By 2011, Brady had already built a dynasty. 3 Super Bowl titles, 2 Super Bowl MVPs, and a reputation as one of the most precise quarterbacks ever to play. But as the league's 2010 labor deal expired, tension between players and owners exploded. The NFL locked out its athletes on March 12, 2011, halting all team activity. No trades, no signings, no practices. To fight back, the players' union, the NFLPA, decertified itself, freeing players to sue the league as individuals under antitrust law. And on March 11, 2011, Tom Brady, joined by stars like Drew Brees, Peyton Manning, and Vincent Jackson, filed Brady vs. National Football League in federal court. The lawsuit argued that the lockout was an illegal group boycott violating the Sherman Antitrust Act. A federal judge initially sided with the players, ordering the league to lift the lockout. But the NFL appealed, and the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals reinstated it, saying labor law still applied while negotiations were ongoing. Even so, the lawsuit did its job. It pressured both sides to make a deal. The players and owners resumed intense talks through July, and on July 21, 2011, the owners approved a framework for a new 10-year collective bargaining agreement. 4 days later, Brady and the other 9 named plaintiffs agreed to settle the case. Training camps opened, football returned. That new deal ended the 132-day lockout, the longest work stoppage in NFL history at the time. It secured better revenue sharing, improved benefits for retirees, and stronger rules on player safety. Brady's involvement wasn't about money, it was about leverage. His name gave weight to the players' cause, showing that even the league's biggest stars were willing to challenge the system to keep the game fair. James McCoy Smith. His NFL career ended before it truly began, but what he did next left a mark far greater than any play he could have made on the field. A cornerback out of the University of Oregon, Smith was drafted in the 8th round of the 1970 NFL Draft by Washington, a promising athlete from Yazoo City, Mississippi. His speed and coverage skills made him a rising name in training camp. But during a preseason game, Smith suffered a severe neck injury that ended his football career almost instantly. His time in the league was over, but his fight was only beginning. Smith decided to take on the very system that had defined professional football for decades, the NFL Draft. In Smith vs. Pro Football, he argued that the draft violated federal antitrust laws by unfairly restricting players' freedom to choose where to work. The system gave teams complete control over newly drafted players, locking them into negotiations with just one franchise and limiting their bargaining power. The federal courts agreed. The D.C. Circuit Court ruled that the NFL Draft, as applied to Smith, was an unreasonable restraint of trade under Section 1 of the Sherman Antitrust Act. It was a major victory. one that confirmed the league's player allocation system could not operate outside the law. Damages were awarded to Smith, later recomputed on remand in 1981, solidifying the legal recognition of his claim. Though James "Yazoo" Smith never suited up again, his case became a foundation for later challenges to NFL labor rules, including Mackey vs. NFL in 1976 and McNeil vs. NFL in 1992, both of which further dismantled restrictive practices and led to modern free agency. John Henderson did more than play wide receiver. He joined a team that changed NFL history without ever taking a snap. His name is etched in one of the most important legal victories for players' rights. Mackey vs. National Football League, the 1976 case that helped dismantle the league's iron grip on player movement. In the early 1970s, NFL players had talent, fame, and grit, but very little freedom. The league's Roselle rule made sure of it. It worked like this. If a player became a free agent and signed with a new team, that team had to compensate the old one, often with players or draft picks. So in 1974, a group of 15 players, including John Henderson and Hall of Famer John Mackey, decided to fight back. Before the lawsuit, Henderson had already made his mark. Born in Arkansas and raised in Texas, he played college football at the University of Michigan before joining the Detroit Lions in 1965. He later joined the Minnesota Vikings, where his performance peaked on football's biggest stage, Super Bowl IV. When the lawsuit was filed in 1974, Henderson's name appeared among the plaintiffs. He wasn't just suing for money, he was fighting for every player's right to fair movement and opportunity. The case unfolded in the U.S. District Court for Minnesota, presided over by Judge Earl R. Larson. Over 55 trial days, lawyers presented more than 400 exhibits and 60 witnesses. The players argued that the Roselle Rule violated Section 1 of the Sherman Antitrust Act, restricting competition and suppressing salaries. In December 1975, Judge Larson agreed. He ruled the Roselle Rule invalid and ordered the NFL to stop enforcing it. The league appealed, but in 1976, the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals upheld the decision, confirming that the rule violated antitrust law under the rule of reason test. It was a landmark victory. The court recognized that the NFL's system unfairly restrained players, blocking them from negotiating freely for their services and limiting their to move between teams even after their contracts had expired. Shaun Wooden spent 8 hard-fought seasons in the NFL, lining up as a defensive back for the Miami Dolphins and the Chicago Bears. Known for his intelligence on the field and his leadership in the locker room, Wooden gave the game everything he had, including his health. Like many players of his era, he endured constant hits to the head at a time when the league's concussion protocols were minimal and the long-term dangers of brain trauma were downplayed. After his retirement in 2004, Wooden began experiencing the same troubling symptoms that affected so many former players: memory loss, mood swings, and headaches. In 2012, hundreds of retired athletes accused the NFL of hiding the true risks of repeated head injuries. Their lawsuits were eventually combined into one massive federal case. Shaun Wooden stepped forward as a co-lead class representative for thousands of retired players. He wasn't just speaking for himself, he was fighting for teammates, opponents, and an entire generation of men whose health had been compromised by the sport they loved. In April 2015, U.S. District Judge Anita Brody approved a landmark settlement between the NFL and its former players. The agreement, valued at over $1 billion, offered uncapped lifetime compensation for those diagnosed with CTE, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's, dementia, and other neurological conditions. For Wooden and the class he represented, it was a breakthrough moment. The settlement didn't erase the pain or restore lost years, but it forced the league to confront its past and improve its future. Paul Krause did more than play defensive back. He was the wall that quarterbacks feared. Drafted in 1964, he made an instant impact, leading the league with 12 interceptions as a rookie. Over 16 seasons with Washington and Minnesota, Krause became one of the greatest safeties in NFL history, setting a record that still stands: 81 career interceptions, 8 Pro Bowls, 4 Super Bowl appearances, Hall of Fame, 1998. His game was built on instincts, reading plays before they happened. But long after the cheering stopped, Krause found himself in another arena: the courtroom. In 2011, Krause joined Hall of Famer Carl Eller and other retired stars in a major lawsuit against the NFL and the NFL Players Association. The suit argued that the league's labor practices and player benefits system, including how retirees were treated, violated antitrust law and unfairly limited medical and financial support for those suffering long-term injuries. At the same time, thousands of former players were filing concussion-related claims, accusing the NFL of failing to warn them about the lasting effects of repeated head trauma. Krause's name appeared among the plaintiffs seeking accountability and fair treatment for those who built the league. The legal fight stretched for years, merging into one of the biggest settlements in sports history. By 2013, the NFL agreed to a $765 million settlement to assist retired players suffering from neurological conditions. A deal later expanded to cover more claims. It wasn't a traditional victory, but it changed everything. It forced the NFL to acknowledge the real cost of its violent past and the hidden toll on its former stars. For Krause, it wasn't about money. It was about truth, about recognition for the men who helped make football America's most watched sport and who paid the price in silence for decades. Logan Mankins, a relentless left guard who punished defenders for a living. Drafted by the New England Patriots in 2005, Mankins became one of the most respected linemen of his generation. A six-time Pro Bowler, two-time first-team All-Pro, and the backbone of Tom Brady's protection. But in 2011, during the most turbulent labor fight in modern football, Mankins joined a different kind of battle, one fought not on turf, but in federal court. That spring, the NFL Players Association dissolved itself to allow players to sue the league directly. 10 players, including Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, Drew Brees, and Logan Mankins, filed an antitrust lawsuit known as Brady versus NFL. Their argument was bold. The NFL's lockout, franchise tag, and free agency limits illegally restricted players' right to work. Mankins, then one of the league's top guards, claimed that these rules held players hostage, preventing them from freely negotiating or choosing their team, even after their contracts expired. The lawsuit hit hard. The federal court initially sided with the players, granting an injunction to stop the lockout. The league appealed, and negotiations intensified behind closed doors. Mankins' name became a quiet symbol of defiance, a respected star willing to take a stand for fair bargaining rights. By July 2011, the fight ended with a new collective bargaining agreement. The deal didn't come from a dramatic courtroom victory. It came from leverage. The lockout ended, football returned, and Logan Mankins, days later, signed a 6-year, $51 million contract with the Patriots, one of the biggest deals ever for a guard at the time. He retired after the 2015 season, leaving behind not just a career defined by toughness, but a mark on labor history that reshaped the modern NFL. Logan Mankins didn't just protect quarterbacks. For one season, he helped protect every player's right to fairness. That's a win that goes far beyond the scoreboard. These men weren't just players. They were game changers in every sense. From locker rooms to courtrooms, they took on one of the toughest leagues on earth and won. Every free agent signing, every massive player contract today exists because these men refused to stay silent. If you enjoyed this video, I'll be posting many more interesting videos on the channel. I'd greatly appreciate it if you could like and subscribe. Thank you very much.